Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Citrix session, episode number 131. My name is Bill Sutton. I'm your host for today. Our leader, Andy Whiteside, is off doing other things today, so he's unable to attend. But I have the ever-present Todd Smith and Geremy Meyers from the Cloud Software Group with me this morning. Todd, why don't you go first? Just how things going? Say hello.
Hey, Bill, and thanks everyone for dropping in and listening to us. Just got back from being in Chicago last week for the HIMSS conference, which is for those of you not familiar, it's the large healthcare IT conference, and it really brings together the fields of medicine and technology. So it was a bunch of people that are really smart in multiple disciplines. So that was awesome to see. Great innovations. And then, as we were chatting right before we started this, Chat GPT and AI seemed to be one of the big themes.
Wow.
Of the conference, which was kind of interesting to hear both people's futuristic thoughts on it, and then the grim reality of, do I really want some AI telling me what to do about my health situations?
Absolutely.
Really awesome to hear that.
There's going to be a lot of debate around that. I think there was an episode not yesterday. This is a Monday. We're all talking right now, but Sunday week ago. So that would have been March the 16th that that dealt with AI. They interviewed the CEO of Google and talked about their approach to AI and some of the challenges and concerns and things that we're going to see. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that impacts our world. Also with us today from the Cloud Software Group, as I mentioned, is Geremy Meyers. Geremy Meyers, you want to say hello?
Well, happy Monday, y'all. Good to be chatting with you. I was just, so Bill asked right before we hopped on what number podcast this was. So I went to the XenTegra podcast site to see if I could decipher that. And as it turns out, I could not. But I did notice the last time we did a podcast was like 3 weeks ago. So it feels awesome to get in front of you guys.
Yeah, a lot of us been traveling and had other commitments, so we're getting back into it. Hopefully, keep it going. Although I know a bunch of us will be at Nutanix next week, out in Chicago.
Is it next week? It's 2 weeks. I'm gonna be there, by the way.
You're right, 2 weeks. You're gonna be there?
I'll be there. You gonna be there?
Yeah, I'll be there.
Awesome. Well,
Todd, you gonna be there?
Nope. Nope. I got HIMSS this year, and Geremy's going to be picking up Nutanix next.
Oh, good.
So what was it like being back in front of, is this your first conference back, Todd? Like first big one you've done?
It's my second one, because we did EDUCAUSE back in the fall of 2021.
Okay.
Which was interesting because it was kind of just getting out of the pandemic, and the social distancing was still there and things like this. HIMSS being a healthcare conference was there was still a significant amount of people walking around with masks on, but overall, it was 50,000 people attended HIMSS this year.
Oh, no kidding. No kidding.
At McCormick Place in Chicago. It was very interesting. They had some great speakers and great keynote sessions and things like that. So, but yeah, it was interesting getting back in front of large groups of people. So
that's awesome. So here's what was interesting about Disrupt. So since we're in this whole let's go to all these conferences talk, Disrupt was like 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I had a chance to go to that. And here's what was interesting: is there were a lot of really good sessions. I sat through like 2 or 3, the keynotes, and it's not that I didn't want to sit through them. It was just I had not seen some of these people in 3 or 4 years, right? Just based on all the stuff. So it felt like a college reunion. So I spent most of my time chatting up customers and partners and just folks I hadn't seen in a while. And lo and behold, I blew right through that session I wanted to go see. That's just kind of how it worked.
Yeah, I had the same experience, Geremy, at Disrupt. I'd actually gone the weekend before Disrupt to the EUC Masters Retreat, which is something that Thin Client Computing, Steve Greenberg puts on out in Arizona. And that was quite a different, it's not really a conference, it's kind of an unconference. I'll give it a little bit of a plug here. It's you basically get there, and the first day you decide what sessions you're going to have, and then lots of the folks that are there are subject matter experts in different areas. So we had sessions on everything EUC, on DAS and leveraging GPUs and cloud workloads. to AI discussions to how to taste French wine. So it was quite an interesting experience. And then I jumped from there on a red eye to Disrupt. And my experience at Disrupt was very similar to yours, Geremy. There were a lot of sessions I wanted to go to, but just too much going on, seeing people and talking about opportunities and talking about work that we've done for them and all those things. So it was nice to reconnect with a lot of folks face to face that we haven't, obviously haven't seen in a while face to face. So that consumed a lot of time, but I think nevertheless, it was still very valuable in that regard.
Yeah. Well, listen, I would love to chat about Chat GPT a little bit, but that could run away with us here. So
yeah, what do we got? Absolutely.
What do we got teed up this week, Bill?
Yeah, this week I've got it on the screen. It is an article, a blog on Citrix's site called Citrix Web Studio for On-Prem is Here. It's written by Wayne Liu. That's Liu. I probably am saying that wrong, but nevertheless. So this article covers the new Web Studio, which will be familiar to those who've leveraged Citrix DAS. It is essentially, as I understand it, I have not installed this myself, but I've used the cloud version. This is like the cloud version of Web Studio, but it's on-prem. And this supports Citrix's whole move towards making things hybrid. So, Todd, I'll give you the first shot at this. What do you want to say about this generally, and then we'll dive into the article.
Yeah, and Bill, this is a great topic to kind of talk about now, because this is the first real product or real feature that's been delivered based on this whole hybrid being the destination messaging that has come out. It was released a couple of weeks ago by both Sridhar and Calvin Chu.
Right.
And we did a podcast about this a couple of weeks ago, about a month ago, and really kind of saying, you know what, the cloud may not be for every single instance, right, or every single workload or every single use case, right? So there's going to be some customers in workloads that perform better or are better controlled being on-prem, right? So we need to make sure that we have this hybrid approach. One of the big things that a lot of customers have been asking for is, okay, well, if I'm on-prem, I don't want to go and have to be forced to use a web console that's up in the cloud someplace to do my administration. Everything needs to be on-prem. So this is kind of the first major component that is being delivered to run on-prem just as it does in the cloud, right? So there's a lot of features. It has been rebranded and retooled. It has a different look and feel, but the functionality is all there. And the biggest thing is, so as I mentioned, we were out at HIMSS last week, and we actually were demoing and had some of the demo capabilities of the on-prem Web Studio being shown. We had, several customers came up and were asking specifically about this, and I think across the board they were saying this is a great step forward. And the other big thing is this is impacting not the end users as much as it is the administrators, right? So administrators are getting a huge benefit out of being able to run this studio, have the web look and feel, but being able to run it on-prem in their environment. They get a lot of benefits around speed, around, the object loading times and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So great intro to it there, Todd. We next in the blog that talks about the installation process, it looks like it's part of 2303. Geremy, you want to take this one and talk a little bit about the installation process and where customers can get this?
So I'll be honest, Bill, I have not stood this up either. Yeah. But I do know there are a couple of pieces that I'm going to skip down here because there's some undercover stuff that this stuff all sits on that's going to be pretty exciting to a lot of folks. And ultimately in 2212, so the release of CVAD that came out late last year, we introduced REST APIs for CVAD, which is a really big deal. So in order to have something like Web Studio work, really all we're doing under the hood is we're calling APIs. That's it. So these are calls into the program that do very specific thing. If you don't know what a REST API is, it's basically a hook into the Citrix infrastructure that lets us do things. It's something that's been in the cloud for a while. Those are APIs that we get leveraged. When you create a machine catalog, there's an API that gets called that does the machine cataloging thing, right? If you want to publish an app, again, these are all just APIs that tie back into the product. And that's something that has never been on-prem. This is important because it enables not only things like Web Studio, but imagine you want to do things like run, one of the things of your universal license, not to go off topic here, is you can run the DAS control plane, or you can run CVAD lifted and shifted inside a hyperscaler. And a lot of folks that want to do that, they want to orchestrate not just the management, but the deployment and all the things. So anyways, long story short, the REST API is a big deal because that's what makes that happen. So having said all that, because we have that in the product now, that's what we're leveraging. So this Web Console Studio, when you interact with it, is leveraging those REST APIs. And so that got introduced with CVAD 2212. That's almost like the foundation that needs to be in place. And then when you look at our most recent release, which is 2303, that's when it's actually in the product. So, having said all that, it gets installed along with the product. I haven't gone through and picked this apart yet, but ultimately there's a piece called Studio Web Server that interacts with an orchestration service on the DDC. So this is a brand new service that gets installed when you install 2203, whether or not you're using Web Console or not. And then from the flip side, I think there's some tokens that maybe you need if you're doing this in the cloud that you don't need on-prem. I didn't answer your question, Bill, but just thinking through this.
You gave a great, I kind of jumped down to the bottom of the article, which talks about the REST APIs. For those that can see this on the screen or looking at the full recording, like Geremy said, CVAD 2212 included the REST APIs. What the interesting thing I find in this section is this sentence at the end of paragraph 2. Going forward, enterprise admins only need to create one set of automation tools because they are leveraging essentially with minimal changes. I presume because they're leveraging the same set, or at least almost the same set of REST APIs, whether you're dealing with the cloud or whether you're dealing with on-prem now with Web Studio. And not just Web Studio, but anything that you create automation tools for, just about where there's a REST API for it, you should be able to orchestrate both in the cloud and on-prem. Would you agree generally?
Correct. Yep, I would agree with that. So it looks like, so I am very quickly reading the documentation here. So there's a tool inside of your delivery controller called the Web Studio tool. It's a Studio config tool. And what it does is you run this command that identifies what the DDCs are and basically creates that proxy configuration for you. And then you have to go through and there's a JSON file you've got to edit, or you've got to enter in the FQDN of what looks like the Web Studio machines. Looks fairly straightforward. But I'll tell you this, usually when I go in and look at, oh, actually, you know what? There's an option now whenever you configure your DDC to install Web Studio. There you go.
Yep.
Then after that, you basically turn it on. So normally you go in and you look at your installation configuration of CVAD, and of course we've all seen the steps are pretty long. Web Studio is like 3 steps. It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, from what I gathered in the preview, I presume you can install Web Studio if you want to on its own set of servers, but by default it will put them on the delivery controllers based on what I'm seeing here.
Yeah. Which, when you think about it, I mean, we've done that for years. You had the option of running Studio or Director on the delivery controllers. You don't necessarily have to. A lot of smaller customers did, but for resource constraints on larger customers, they pull that off.
Oh yeah, a lot of our projects will pull Director off. Obviously, the Studio was at least with the on-prem version was still leveraging an MMC call into the database. So that you could put elsewhere if you wanted to, but most customers chose to run it on the delivery controllers. But we have a lot of customers, particularly the medium to large ones, that will put the Director servers in a cluster, 2 or 3, and then load balance them, and then just create a nice friendly URL that their help desk can hit. So that's pretty common.
I mean, it also solves a lot of the separation of responsibilities that are out there. Especially putting administrative consoles or administrative tools on production level machines. Especially application servers and IIS servers and things like that.
Yeah, it looks like. Go ahead.
Here's an existential question too: is when are we going to get away from MMCs in general? I mean, I feel like that is it's a legacy technology now, but it's still in every version of Windows. And considering most applications are sort of modernizing like this, let's just do away with that. I'd love to see that.
That's a really good question. I had that came up on some call recently. I don't remember if it was with Citrix or with another vendor. That what about all these MMCs that we leverage in a Windows operating system, Windows Server operating system, or a lot of them are still around. Things like Active Directory users and computers. There is the AD management tool now that's a little bit more modern, but a lot of the legacy stuff, DNS. AD certificate services, all that stuff, still leverage an MMC.
And I think part of that conversation needs to be also around shifting the way administrators especially are doing their jobs, right? They've gotten for years they were trained on just opening up an MMC plugin and making their changes that way, as opposed to having to go in through an API or going in through some type of authenticated plugin, right? So leveraging some of the tokens, right? So one of the things that's interesting is, as part of this Web Studio, this new capability, one of the things that's interesting is now they're bringing out things called bearer tokens. Sorry, that's just my Southern Ohio drawl coming in. Bearer tokens actually are very similar to what we used to have with secure ticket authorities, where you would get an STA that would be only for you as an individual. We're taking that same concept and moving it into administrators that want to access these APIs, especially the sensitive APIs that are out there, REST being one of them, and being able to say, hey, you know what, for this instance, Todd is able to make these changes, but the minute he stops and disconnects or makes any alteration or hits commit, that token is no longer valid. I have to go and reauthorize that token. So it's kind of a one ride only ticket at the carnival.
Todd, this is an interesting topic. It looks like that is what Web Studio On-Prem leverages. Where do the tokens come from? Like, how am I generating these guys? Because I'm used to this from a cloud perspective. So in any native cloud app, usually you go out to the website, you create a token. This is how ChatGPT works. If you want to leverage ChatGPT in one of your apps, you got to go out to ChatGPT. You got to have a validated. Back in the day, we'd call that a password, but these days it's called a secret or a token. Or actually, the secret is used to create the token. The token is usually something you use on a per sort of session basis. But I guess for an on-prem type scenario with a bearer token, like, where am I generating the token for that?
So typically that would come out of the service. So it's very similar to the way you put a certificate on a web server, or you put a certificate out on some type of service, and then you go and authenticate against that certificate, because you now have some type of shared secret between you and the certificate bearer, and be able to do that. The token, the bearer token, would take the similar approach. I believe it's going to be coming out of the console, that orchestration service.
So what you just said makes sense. I'll tell you where it might come from, right? So straightforward installation. I'm looking at this section, Bill, but it says security. Because Web Studio only supports secure connections when the installer prepares IIS server. So that's what's front-ending this, of course.
Yeah.
It creates a self-signed cert. The recommendation is to use a trusted enterprise cert. So do you think, is that coming from IIS and the cert, or is that literally just to protect the front-end communication between you and your web browser as you're interacting?
That's a good question.
As always, Bill, we have more questions than the blog post.
Well, that's fine. We can address these questions at the intro of the next one. But one thing I wanted to highlight, and apparently my Zoom is limited today for some reason. We have 10 more minutes. I don't know why. There, like I think Geremy, you touched on this, but just for the audience, there are two deployment options today. One is the integrated option, which is where the orchestration service is installed on the DDC, and then Studio Web Server is where web services are installed on the DDC, and then the CBAT admin accesses them directly. And then the other option is the proxied option, which is what we kind of were sort of talking about just now.
Gotcha.
Which is where the orchestration service, which is on the DDC by default, and I think that's where it has to live probably, sits on there, and then we can have our own dedicated studio web. The customer can have their own dedicated studio web server, and I would imagine that if not today, then very shortly there could be multiple of these that could be load balanced, just like Director, and those talk back over the REST API to the orchestration service, and then deliver the console to the admin. So those are the two options I think for delivering Web Studio. The traditional way of doing it, which is installing everything on the DDCs, and then a more distributed model where you install the service, probably gets installed as part of the installation of the DDC, and then you can put the web server elsewhere. So,
well, when you think about it, though, from a security perspective, you could hide the orchestration service from the CBAT admin and just protect it, right? So all access is through the Web Studio server in this proxy mode. So maybe, at this point, I don't know which the recommended would be, but you could put the orchestration service behind a firewall, which I guess this is what the article says, a trusted network, and then you put your web server, elsewhere, depending on how you deploy it. So that makes sense.
Yeah, you could put them into VLANs, a server VLAN, and maybe a web server VLAN or something like that if you really want to segment. Let's see, we covered the REST APIs. So guys, anything else you want to cover on this topic? I think we've hit it pretty well. This might just be a short one today.
It could be a very short one.
Well, I'll double down on what Todd said. So I had this conversation with someone recently where we were trying to plan out some sort of like a marketing webinar, tech talk, whatever. And I brought up, there's another blog post we're going to cover here probably in a week or two around just what's new. And he took me aside and said, hey, when we're talking about this, I have a lot of customers who are still on-prem. Can we talk about the on-prem stuff? And what I had to tell him was, if anything, so Todd hit this before. Hector and Sridhar talked about how it's destination hybrid, is I think what we're calling it. But just so we're all clear, there's a huge focus on moving things on-prem, or at least making them available on-prem. So, the past 3 or 5 years, we've talked about a shift to the cloud. A lot of the Citrix sales teams have talked about migrating to the cloud, but I think where this has landed is, customers are just landing everywhere. And so not only is the messaging changing, but the engineering's changing. Like there is a big effort to run a lot of these things on-prem. Here's a really good example. We're talking about Web Studio here, but there has been a product that has been born out of the cloud, which is our secure private access product. By the way, we just went GA on that being on-prem as well. In fact, requires 0 cloud component. It's a NetScaler, it's storefront, it's your DDCs, it's the most recent version of code. But now you're running clientless access to internal websites without publishing a browser with XenApp anymore. So again, heavy investment with on-prem. And I think that is with the shift of the organization into these business units. There's a lot of engineering and resource going into just Citrix and NetScaler, and on-prem in the cloud, hybrid, doesn't matter.
Yeah, absolutely. The secure private access on premises, that was the other article I considered for this podcast today. But before we jumped on that one, I saw the Web Studio had popped earlier this morning, so I thought we'd touch on that one first. Maybe we can do this one in a future podcast. I think it's definitely something worth discussing. To your point, Geremy.
What's interesting, so I had a chance to sit down with the product manager, not Praveen, but one of the other ones recently, and talk about, this, because I knew we were investing on-prem, but I still wanted to understand the use case, right? And get a little feedback on why was this so important to get on-prem. So maybe I'll share that in the future. But how about that for a carrot, right? Let's talk about that one.
That's right. Absolutely. We can make that the next one or one in the near future, because I suspect we're going to want to go over the Monica's article at some point too. So stay tuned.
I think so.
All right, folks. I think we've covered this one pretty well this morning. So thanks for your attention. Any final words or thoughts, Todd?
I think we're snow is melted. so that's good.
That's good. Yeah.
We're kind of in that sweet spot of the year where we have NBA finals, NHL finals, and baseball starting up. So for some people, we do have football still going on. So if you're an XFL or USFL fan, but the big thing is the NFL draft is coming up as well. So hopefully the Patriots will pick someone to help us win a championship again. So.
Yeah. Todd, I gotta ask. So part of your role now is you cover Canada. And so I know very little about, and not just that, you cover Canada. I actually have partners that I cover in Canada now. So I'm becoming more fluent in all things Canadian.
You have someone on your team from Canada too. So,
Well, yes, I do. So I'm trying to be a good citizen and understand. When does the Canadian Football League kick off? I feel like I should get to know.
That should be coming up in, I believe, June is when they usually start off, because their Grey Cup, which is their championship, usually finishes up in typically early to late October. So it's more of a summer type of program. There's very few teams that play indoor stadiums in Canada, and if you play too late to September, you're shoveling snow.
Fascinating. Okay. What always threw me off about Canadian football is 250-yard lines. It is 50. It's not meter lines.
It's 100. It's a 110-foot or 110-yard field, and you only have 3 downs to make a first down, and you have to go 15 yards. So a lot of throwing, not a big running game, and they have a lot of missed field goals run back for yards. So
isn't the field goal in the front of the end zone too? It's not in the back like in the NFL. Okay.
Yeah. Yep. When I was out in Vancouver, I went to the BC Lions game. It was a very unique experience, and you can see why, a lot of the Canadian football players are very speedy, and they also have a smaller roster, so you have a lot of two-way players. But the sport you really want to get involved in, Geremy, is curling.
Oh boy!
So curling is sliding granite bricks across the ice.
Oh yeah, that was in the Olympics a couple of years ago.
Yes, it's a fairly and it's one of those games, kind of like bowling, where you can have a beer in one hand and the stone in the other, and slide it across the ice.
I don't know, Todd. I would argue there's more effort in curling than bowling, because you got to sweep the ice.
You got to sweep the ice. You got to and you're cold. Yes, it tends to be very chilly, but it's a good sport. But it's not the national sport of Canada. Just to let you know, Geremy, is hockey. It's not hockey.
It's not.
It's not curling.
Moose hunting.
It's lacrosse.
You just made that up. You just lost all credibility with me, Todd.
Nope.
All right, guys. Geremy, any final thoughts from you?
Oh boy, no. I should probably stop.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining. We'll see you again next week. Guys, have a great day, and again, we'll see you next week.
Great.
Excellent. Thanks, guys.